Good afternoon. I'm Monica Robbins, a senior health correspondent for WKYC TV, and I am extremely pleased and proud to be part of this forum today at the City Club about the heroin epidemic, its causes, and what we as a community are doing to address the problem. Many of you probably already know that heroin use has been on the rise across the country. In 2002, there were nearly 170,000 Americans reporting heroin use. In 2012, that number more than doubled. Like other major cities, Cleveland and its surrounding communities are not immune. We've seen a dramatic increase in heroin-related deaths that now the problem is considered an epidemic by those in healthcare and in law enforcement. If you're not familiar, perhaps you think this is an inner-city problem. You'd be wrong. Hardcore drug use has infiltrated every community in Northeast Ohio. It doesn't discriminate by race or economic status or gender. In the last decade, I've lost 3 family members to heroin overdose, and that's why I'm here and so passionate about this issue. It's also why WKYC allowed me to produce an hour documentary last April aimed at educating and raising awareness. If you haven't seen it yet, go to wkyc.com/local/heroin and take the time to watch it, especially with your children or grandchildren. Why? Because often the abuse starts in the home medicine cabinet, where kids have access to their parents' or grandparents' pain pills. Last year, there were nearly 200 opiate overdose deaths in Cuyahoga County. Compare that to 2007, when the drug took 40 lives. Experts agree rampant overprescribing of painkillers has mainly contributed to this epidemic. Now that doctors are getting more educated to the problem and cutting back, pills are more difficult to find and more expensive. You can get a dose of heroin on the streets of Cleveland for $10. Not long ago, there were so many prescriptions for opiates such as OxyContin, Percocet, oxycodone, and Vicodin that each and every Ohioan could have 67 pills. There is no single solution. The entire community needs to be involved. Law enforcement, education, and prevention experts, and healthcare and treatment providers all need to work with communities and educate families and communities of the epidemic that they're in. In November, Cleveland Clinic hosted the region's first heroin summit, and answers and actions are now being developed to attack the problem. Our panel today reflects the people working on the front lines fighting this epidemic. Judge Michael Astrab is a judge in Cuyahoga County's Court of Common Pleas. A native of the region, he sees firsthand the way this epidemic is ruining lives, and he's initiated several heroin forums around the county in the suburbs. And Dr. Christina Delos Reyes is a medical consultant at the Center for Evidence-Based Practices at Case Western Reserve University. She is board certified in both adult psychiatry and addiction psychiatry. Dr. Chris is also the Chief Clinical Officer for the Cuyahoga County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board. Dr. Chris is a strong advocate and was a strong advocate of the passage of the 2013 Health and Human Services Levy because of the need to increase services. Dr. Delos Reyes, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
Explain to our audience, how big is this problem?
Okay, I do want to first make one correction. I am the former Chief Clinical Officer of the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County. I left that job on December 31st, so I just want to make that clear. But I am still affiliated with University Hospitals of Cleveland in the Department of Psychiatry. This problem has, let's say that this problem has gotten 400% bigger in the last 13 years. So if you want to think about, I mean, to me, 400% is a huge number. And so there are, every day in this county, about 5 people that die of an opiate-related overdose. And that can be from heroin or it can be from prescription opiates. And so for every person that dies, there are many people that overdose and don't die. For every person that overdoses, there are hundreds and dozens more people that are out there using. So looking at heroin-related deaths and opiate-related deaths is just looking at the tip of the iceberg. You are more likely to die of a heroin overdose in Cuyahoga County than you are of a car crash, a suicide, or a homicide. So those are some really shocking numbers, at least they are to me, and that's one of the reasons that I've taken this on as an issue.
Judge, talk about how, from your perspective, how are you seeing the problem, and what kind of scale is it on?
We're seeing it on many, many different levels. We have obviously the classic cases of trafficking and possession, individuals that come in contact with law enforcement, either with the drugs on them or through investigation, where they're arrested for selling the drugs. What we have, everyone knows, most people I'm sure have heard of the 6 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon. It's kind of the example I use. Well, I think in Cuyahoga County and throughout the country, there's a certain degree of separation from heroin, because you have the classic trafficking, the classic possession, but then you have the burglaries, the robberies. The scrapping is a huge problem in Cuyahoga County, where people are going into everywhere and stripping abandoned homes or stripping not abandoned homes. I've had some kids on my docket stealing aluminum siding off their grandmother's home in order to scrap with probably a day's worth of heroin. And so it's not the classic what you think of, just somebody buying or selling. There's so many different related situations going on with the violent crimes, with I mean pretty much everything. I'd say well over 50% of my personal docket I could somehow tie to heroin, either directly or indirectly.
Talk about some of the stories you've heard from these people, and for both of you, describe who is a heroin addict.
It's not always who you would think. Yeah. Addiction is a disease that doesn't discriminate based on what color your skin is or how much money you make or what neighborhood you live in. And so I have had clients that are as young as 19 that have been using heroin since they were 14, to folks that are nearing 70 that now have 10 years of sobriety from using heroin. So it really does run the gamut. It is everywhere, and it is all of us. And for every person that has addiction, they estimate that every person with addiction touches the lives intimately of 4 other people. So, and if 1 out of 8 people in America has an addiction problem, hey, you can sort of do the math. So it really is everywhere in all of us, is the way I would describe it.
No, I agree. I have a woman, or she actually was finally off my docket, but she's my mother's age. And so it was very difficult dealing with her, because it's like yelling at my mom when she's up there trying to, because she had a surgery, and she got hooked on the pain meds off of her surgery. And her husband had a surgery, and she had been clean. Then her husband brought the pain meds into the house to treat his, I think it was a knee surgery, and she started using his pain meds and fell off the wagon. I have the most striking example. I give it to a lot of people. We have to cover the arraignment bench once every few months. That's where all the new people come in and they plead guilty or not guilty at the arraignment bench. And I was looking down writing the paperwork, and I looked up, and there was a beautiful girl, maybe like 19, college football cheerleader. And I looked to see what the crime was, heroin. And like, wow. I mean, it runs the gamut. I'm like, you're not going to look like that in 2 or 3 years if you continue to abuse, heroin. And I'll give the example right now. I brought a prop with me. The task force has outside the heroin and opioid epidemic, and it's more the opioids. That's where you start. I had a tooth pulled because I'm paranoid of the dentist, and I let it go too far, so they had to pull the tooth. December 17th, I was given 15 Vicodin when I left the dentist's office. I took 2 of them. So I now have 13 Vicodin sitting in my medicine cabinet that I'll probably never use. And frankly, I needed one. The second one, it was borderline. I probably didn't even need it. And so now I have 13 pills that are laying around my house for my kids to get, for a burglar to get, for anybody to take. And so I'm sure I'm not the only person that has Vicodin, and we'll talk about that later. But this is where it starts. You hear the injuries. Kids in high school, they get a football injury or a sports injury, or just wisdom teeth getting pulled out. Just like this, I could have easily downed all of these and gotten hooked on this. It's very, very simple to do. But this is where it starts. No one starts out just shooting heroin. Usually this is where you start, and it's downhill from there.
Talk about the common stories you hear, Dr. Chris, about how people start, and then I want you to talk about how addiction happens.
Sure. So how people usually start these days on heroin is exactly what Judge said, is through the opiate painkillers, otherwise known as narcotics. So there's what I often say when I teach is that we can't practice modern medicine without opiates. So unfortunately, this is a double-edged sword that we have to deal with. So there is no such thing as modern medicine without opiate medications. So we need them, but at the same time, they can be extraordinarily harmful. And so when you are given pain medicines, you may have a brain that is susceptible to addiction. Therefore, when you take an opiate pain pill, you may react very differently than somebody else. One of the sure signs that I have learned in my clinical experience is that most people who take an opiate will have one of a couple of reactions. You'll get very nauseous, you'll throw up, and you'll get very sleepy or tired. That's the typical reaction. People that have a propensity for addiction, when they take an opiate pain pill, they will say, I feel great. I have a lot of energy. I feel like I want to clean the entire house. I feel fantastic. So when I am listening to my clients' stories, that's what I'm listening for. I'm listening for somebody to tell me that when I took an opiate, it was like the world opened up. I had a ton of energy. I felt fantastic. And I think, red flag. So as opposed to most people who say, man, I slept for 3 days and I was so nauseous and I puked. That's two very different reactions. So that's a red flag. And then what happens is your brain says more. So you want more. So many stories of folks who ran out of their prescription, called the dentist up again, called the doctor up again and said, I'm still having some pain, doc. Could you please prescribe me some more? And the doctor or the dentist does, and that continues. And unfortunately, sometimes you can get refills for 6 months without even ever going back to the doctor's office. So that's definitely a way. And then finally, the prescriber gets scared or upset and stops prescribing. Then you go into opiate withdrawal, which I don't have to tell anyone in the room is a horrible state of being. So you go into opiate withdrawal and you are looking for a solution, and unfortunately the solution is heroin. And so it goes from being I'm hooked on pills to my supply of pills was cut off, now I need something else, and the substitute, the easy cheap substitute is heroin. So
we've all heard of the war on drugs. Why aren't we addressing and arresting all of the drug dealers?
Because there frankly are way too many of them. And unfortunately, when you say the phrase drug dealer, it carries a whole bunch of different connotations. We think of the typical drug dealer as somebody on a street corner, with trying to do little furtive hand-to-hand transactions with people. But if you want to call a dentist who prescribes too many Vicodin, who's not doing anything illegal, but technically that's a drug dealer. It just kind of escapes description. I know that the United States Attorney's Office and the Prosecutor's Office here in Cuyahoga County are working very, very hard to crack down on what are known as pain mills, or doctors who their sole practice is writing pain medication prescriptions. Your physical examination consists of how much do you weigh, and that's so they can prescribe the correct amount so they don't kill you right off the bat. And that's the true. That's the how much do you weigh? Doc, I got my knee hurts. Okay, we'll give you some Vicodin, and that's the extent of the physical examination. And I know that the United States Attorney's Office and the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor have units dedicated to hunting those people down. And there have been quite a few indictments recently of doctors who were doing that. But there are drug dealers everywhere. Like I said, it's not the typical. You don't think of the typical street corner drug dealer anymore. It could be anybody. We've heard of kids, selling or giving away their ADHD medication in elementary school. That's a drug dealer, and so it's just the word escapes definition.
Right. Grandmothers selling drugs from their kitchen in Southern Ohio to make thousands of dollars a month. So it's extraordinarily lucrative. And I was thinking, as you were talking about physicians and dentists that have these pill mills, the other sure signs are I will only take cash, and that the parking lot is completely filled. So when you see those signs, you kind of know what you're dealing with.
How are your hands tied in the courtroom relating to the law?
Well, the hands, I'm going to kind of take that in a broader picture. We always tell people, see something, say something. If you think you know someone that's dealing, you have a house in your street, that all of a sudden there's activity day and night, people coming in for 30 seconds it seems and leaving, classic signs of perhaps something illegal going on, you make a phone call to the local police and you expect something to be done right away. Unfortunately, they can't call up and say, hey, Judge Mike, Mr. Jones called and said that the guy next to him is dealing drugs. Can you sign a search warrant for us? It doesn't work that way. We have to start off, we have to have what's called probable cause. So the investigation starts with a tip from the community, then the police start investigating it. I'm not going to go into the ways that they investigate because there are many different ways that it's done, and that's not our concern as to how it's done. But They do their investigation, then they develop what's called probable cause, or what they believe is probable cause. They come to me with a search warrant, and then if I believe probable cause exists, I'll sign the warrant, they'll go raid the house or whatever, the business. So there has to be steps that are followed. Obviously, there's what's known as due process. You can't, just because someone's charged with dealing drugs doesn't mean that they're a drug dealer. They have to go through the criminal justice system and be prosecuted. They have to have evidence. They have to have witnesses who are willing to come down and testify about what's going on. And a lot of times, especially in Cleveland, I've had to issue arrest warrants for witnesses to come down on some of these cases because they're afraid of the drug dealers getting vengeance on them for coming to testify. And so it's getting witnesses to come to court is half the battle. They have recently reformed the sentencing and some of the laws in the state of Ohio where, as far as a first-time offender, a drug trafficker, I cannot send that person to prison. I have to put them on probation if it's a certain level of offense and it's their first time being in trouble. There are hoops I can jump through to overcome that, but the hoops end up defeating the purpose of or what the minimum punishment could be anyway. So we generally will put first-time drug dealers on probation because we don't really have an alternative to do so. So there's just so many hurdles. The budget cuts that we've had have really affected the way the court does business. We had what's known as Treatment Alternatives to Street Crime task, and our budget for that was slashed. And luckily we got some of that money back, but that was what we used to try to give people treatment through the courts. And is Judge Mattia here? No, he does a fantastic job with our drug court, and we have him and Judge Mays in the municipal court work with offenders to try to get them treatment and get them help. And if they do everything right, generally the case gets dismissed. But so we're trying to overcome those hurdles by being creative with the way we do things in the courts.
You mentioned that on your docket more than 50% of the cases are drug related. How many of those are what you believe to be people addicted, and how many would be drug dealers?
I don't know as far as numbers, but I'll just give a few examples that I give to the people I speak to about this. I already talked about the people who stripped their grandmother's house of the aluminum siding. I have a girl, actually she's no longer with us. She was in Maple Heights buying heroin and stumbled into an undercover drug operation and panicked when the plainclothes officers came at her car. She hit the gas and almost killed 2 police officers. She pled guilty in my room, and then 2 days later her mom found her dead with a needle stuck in her arm. She had overdosed. She left behind 3 kids under the age of, I believe, 5, and she was, I think, 22 years old. We have a pair of geniuses from Ravenna whose drug dealer got arrested, and they decided to take these are 2 sisters, decided to take mom's Volvo from Ravenna and drive up to East 55th and Woodland to try to find a heroin dealer to buy stuff. And they kind of stood out in the Volvo driving around at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so luckily Cleveland police saw them, kind of knew what they were up to and waited till they did something, then came in and got them for buying the drugs. They're both getting treatment right now on our docket. But like I said, we have the scrappers, and it's just almost everything. I myself, in the Strongsville Walmart in the past month, have been approached twice. Somebody trying to sell me a gift card that they got for Christmas. The guy looked strung out beyond belief. Had 2 guys pull up next to me in the parking lot asking for $5 for gas, and I think what they were doing was sizing me up to rob me. But so even in happy Strongsville, stuff happens, and it's everywhere, and we always have to be vigilant and be aware of what's going on. But I don't want to quantify it, but I can tell you, one way or another, the majority of my cases have some sort of tie to drugs, and right now it's heroin and opioids.
Dr. Chris, can you give us the history? How did we get here? Because I think a lot of people are confused.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts to that story, Monica. Where shall I start? I'll start about 1997, when there was a law passed called the Intractable Pain Law, which said that we have to start treating people in pain, and we have to start treating their pain. So at that time, so pre-1997, there was a huge pendulum where people who really needed pain medicine couldn't get it. They changed the laws, and they said, we have to treat all these people that are in pain. Pendulum swings about 15 years later, And this is, at least the way I look at it, is this is where we are now. We treated all those people in pain, maybe didn't take a careful enough look at their possible risk factors for addiction, and then a lot of other people jumped on that pain bandwagon, the ones that had the addiction, because they said, hey, this is an easy way to get high. And I think, so that's one thing that happened. I think the other thing is that we have in our country more and more direct-to-consumer advertising. So I look at that as another factor. So America is a place where there is a pill for every ill, and we have to get relief, and we have to have it now. And so folks that make drugs, hey, that's a great market. You know, people want relief now, and we can directly advertise to you on your television set. So, you know, I've seen more commercials for psychiatric drugs, erectile dysfunction drugs, pain medications. You see all of it on television now. So it's hitting the youngest audiences. People just seeing that this is the way the country works. If you hurt somewhere, then you should have this pill. And then I think that there's also been sort of this move recently toward looking at patient experience of care in hospitals. So you now have the right as a patient to say, I deserve what I need to get, and if I don't get it, then I can give my doctors a bad rating. So how does this translate? What does this mean for the opiate epidemic? Well, if I go to an emergency room and say, I have back pain and you don't treat my back pain, I can give you a bad grade. That bad grade gets translated over to the hospital administration, who says, doctor, you got a bad grade on that. You better treat people's pain and you better give them what they want. So physicians, particularly ER physicians, are placed in the impossible position of having to satisfy everybody that walks into the emergency room and at the same time do what's clinically right and what's justified. It's really, unfortunately, had unintended consequences. I'm all for patients having a great experience of care, but it's been manipulated by people with addiction to say, hey, if I don't get what I want, I'll just give you a bad grade.
Can you talk about the science of the addiction of the opiate and what it does to the brain?
Sure. So every opiate works on a receptor in the brain called a mu receptor. So there's a mu opiate receptor, and what that receptor does is two things. It kills pain, and it makes you feel really, really good. And so what happens is, with every drug that's addictive, there is a phenomenon called tolerance, and there's a phenomenon called withdrawal. So with tolerance, the more you take of the pill, the less you feel it. So the more you need to take. So, you know, for example, you might start out taking 2 Vicodins a day. But by the time your addiction is out of control, you might be taking 100 Vicodins a day, and it still doesn't give you the same feeling that the 2 gave you at beginning. Then what? So that's tolerance. Then what happens, for instance, is you get arrested. You end up in Cuyahoga County jail. You go through withdrawal cold turkey, not pleasant, but you go through withdrawal. Now all your receptors have been totally washed clean of all the opiates that were there. You are released from jail. Now your tolerance has dropped from way up here to way down here. You're released from jail, and now you think, I need to use 100 Vicodin again to get that same feeling. But in fact, what happens is the brain sort of resets itself and the tolerance goes way down. So now when you use the same amount that you used before you went into the jail, it actually is enough to kill you. And that is actually, unfortunately, how a lot of overdoses happen. People go into detox, they go into the hospital, they go into jail, their receptors get wiped clean, they come out thinking, I'm going to go back to using the same amount I was using. They don't wake up. That's unfortunately part of the way in which this particular drug works. That's what makes it so deadly.
And part of the problem with heroin also is, you know, when we talk about the opioids, at least those are FDA-approved narcotics. You know what you're putting in your system if you buy something that was manufactured in this country. With heroin, it varies from who's making it, the purity level of the heroin, and what's called cutting, what they're using to actually make their batch bigger. And you heard over I think it was in December, they had a bunch of deaths in Lorraine. Yes. And apparently either that dealer was selling pure fentanyl or mixing it or cutting it with fentanyl. We've heard people cutting with rat poison, anything to make it, generally people use like baby formula, innocuous things, but some people out there, and one of the issues that it's kind of ironic when I've heard talking to law enforcement, when there's a large drug bust of a major gang goes down or a big drug dealer goes down, you may see a lot of overdose deaths following that because his customers go to a new dealer, and the new dealer makes a completely different mixture of heroin than what the old dealer was using. And so they don't know what they're shooting up, and all of a sudden you'll see a rash of overdoses because what they thought they were getting from their old dealer was completely different than what they're shooting in their bodies now.
Is it possible to recover from a heroin addiction?
Yes, it is very possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. Addiction in general is a very treatable illness. We know that now. I don't think enough people know it. Heroin addiction, if you compare it to alcohol addiction, cocaine addiction, marijuana, etc., I think it is one of the tougher ones to kick because the withdrawal is so painful and it's so overwhelming to folks. But we do have many good treatments available, and usually you need a combination of treatments. So, like I said, this is a country where one pill fixes everything, right? Well, not so when it comes to, heroin addiction. You may need a medication, sure enough. That might be something like Suboxone or methadone or naltrexone. But you will probably also need group treatment, intensive outpatient, residential treatment. And furthermore, you will likely need a 12-step program, so a program of spiritual recovery. And usually it's the folks that can do the combination of all those three things and stick with it and have the support from their family or friends. Those are the ones who make it.
How long does it take?
To get well? It's a lifelong process. It isn't, we don't have a cure for addiction in this year or in this century, I don't think. But guess what? We don't have a cure for cancer, we don't have a cure for hypertension, and we don't have a cure for diabetes. It's one of many chronic diseases that we all face, and though they're not curable, they're manageable. So you manage this illness the same way that you manage any other illness you might have.
Does it change the chemistry in your brain, or does it change the function in your brain at all?
Yes. Sometimes the changes in the brain can be permanent. If you're one of the lucky ones and you catch the disease early enough, you can miraculously reverse a lot of those negative brain changes. There are some folks who take it too far. They may have a stroke and not be able to come back from that. They may have some other thing that happens to their liver. They may catch hepatitis C, etc., or HIV. So a lot of those things then you can't reverse. But a lot of the brain changes that happen, once the person's been in recovery, they estimate for a person with opiate addiction, it takes 6 to 12 months for your brain to get back to somewhat normal. Then that's when you really start to see the recovery taking off.
Judge, what are you going to do with those Vicodin?
Hey now, I will tell you what I will do with them. There is all through Cuyahoga County, and I know we have some representatives from the Board of Health here today. Twice a year, I believe, they have what's known as prescription drug drop-off, where they'll set a location up somewhere in Cuyahoga County, and you can take all of your unused prescriptions to that facility, and it's kind of a one-stop shop. You dump it all. Several police stations now have drop boxes inside their main station. And they look like mailboxes. You can take unused prescription drugs to those facilities and just place them in there. One thing to be very careful of is you should never carry a prescription that is not yours, that is on you, or do not carry prescription medications in an unmarked container. That is a felony. And so if you get pulled over, you're speeding and you're trying to go to the drug drop-off and you have narcotics on you that are not yours or that are not in a container, technically you could be charged with a felony for that. So you have to be very careful in disposing of the medication. But we're working with communities to try to get the drop boxes into the local police stations. They have to be manned or in the vicinity of certified law enforcement. So we can't have them at the library, we can't have them at the community center. They have to be in a police station. And so I know a lot of cities are on board. We're working with Cleveland, and we're working with some of the other suburbs to try to get their chiefs of police and mayors to agree to have those installed. One of the things, as you get into this, you kind of learn some weird things, stuff you never think about. Is anybody here a real estate agent? Oh, we have no realtors. Does anybody have a house for sale? Okay. When you have an open house at your house, there are instances of 2-man or 3-man teams that will go into a house, distract the realtor, and while the realtor's distracted in the basement or on the first floor, they'll go through the house and look for the prescription meds. They'll go through the medicine cabinets, take all the scripts out, and they'll hit the house, and the homeowner comes home and all their drugs are gone. And we're trying to work with the local realtor boards to make the realtors more aware, to tell your clients to please get rid of your prescription drugs when there's an open house or when there's a showing, because people will pretend they're looking at the house for the sole purpose of stealing the narcotics.
I would also say when it comes to prescription drugs that 75% of folks who start abusing prescription drugs get the medicine initially from family and friends. And some of the things I've learned, even though I'm a doctor and I'm not a law enforcement person, is that it is a felony to share a controlled substance that belongs to you with somebody else. So when someone says, "Can I take one of your OxyContin for this horrible migraine that I'm having?" please don't give it to them. That's a felony. You're not supposed to be doing that. And who knows, you might be the 5th or 6th person that person has asked for a drug. And I actually know of a death that happened because a nurse was going around to many, many different doctor friends of hers and just asking for 2 pills, ended up ODing on the pills that she got from multiple different doctors. So you might think you're doing somebody a favor. I have this horrible migraine. Can I borrow or can you prescribe me? I would think twice about that. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, we have a lot more to discuss, but I think at this point we're going to break for the mid-forum comments.
Just go to the Q&A.
Just go to Q&A. Okay. All right. Well, before we do that, one thing, when most of you think of heroin, I'm assuming that you think of the needle in the spoon, right? You shoot it up. This was the drug that was popular in the 60s and 70s, and you think of the person in the back alley, and this is the drug that was the one that, you know, you're at rock bottom if you get to this point. That's not how they're doing it anymore. Can you talk about the ways people are using heroin and opiates?
Absolutely. Most people who start using heroin now snort it. It is so much more powerful now that you can snort the powder instead of having to dissolve it and then put it into your vein. So most people do start it by snorting. By working with an organization here in Cuyahoga County called Robbie's Voice, I found out that there's another way that people are doing it, is they're dissolving the heroin in an eyedropper and dropping drops of heroin in their eyes before they go to school. And so there are many ways to do it, not just the traditional way of IV. So pretty amazing.
And without sounding too much like my parents, I kind of wanted to build on something you had talked about earlier about the ways people are becoming exposed to it. And I promise not to use the phrase I usually use to describe these people, but celebrities. And you just saw Justin Bieber got arrested in Miami over the weekend. He admitted to getting Xanax from his mother and was in the bar, in the strip club at 19 years old, popping Xanax. We don't know what he was drinking. He admitted to smoking marijuana, you know, inside the strip club. We have Miley Cyrus, who openly advocates for the use of Molly, which is ecstasy, in some of her music. Madonna has been on stage actively advocating the use of ecstasy and Molly at her concerts. And you look at some of I mean, and with all due respect to today's artists versus the Beatles, had Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, LSD. So it happens to every generation, but you know, popular culture, the stuff we see on TV, you know, instead of condemning Justin Bieber for taking Xanax that was not his, and then drinking or smoking weed with it, the media reports it almost like glorifying the use. I didn't see any condemnation of it, and that tells kids to a certain extent that it's okay if Justin Bieber's doing it or if Miley Cyrus is doing it. Look, they're millionaires. They obviously, you know, can do it, and so we have to be very careful what our kids are being exposed to out in the media.
Why aren't kids afraid of this?
Because for one thing, teenagers are indestructible, at least in their own minds, and so I think that's part of it. And I just think that social norms have relaxed. I guess there's no other easier way to say it, but that's actually what's happened, I think.
Yeah,
so.
I don't want to say young kids are dumb, but I'll give you a perfect example of what's no offense, of what's going on these days. There's a phenomena that I heard of recently called farm parties or skittle parties or pill parties, where basically all the kids in school get together. Hey, we're having a party at Billy's house tonight. Go to mom and dad's medicine cabinet and just take something, and we're going to put it in a big bowl, and you're going to reach in and take whatever's in the bowl. So you could be taking a Tylenol, you could be taking an Advil, you could be taking a Percocet, a Xanax, anything, and then, you know, obviously there's liquor and booze at these parties too. So you're taking an unknown substance, you're putting an unknown substance in your body, and then you're drinking alcohol, or even Red Bull. I mean, you take a blood pressure medication, your blood pressure drops out down through the floor, and you die. So that's, I mean, I don't want to say dumb, I don't want to malign kids, but I mean, that's the stupidest thing I think I've ever heard. And when I bring it up at the heroin forums I see kids in the audience laugh because they've actually heard of this. And it's in every community it's going on. And so that's why my whole thing, see something, say something, especially for the kids. If you know there's a party going on, you have a school resource officer, you can make an anonymous tip to the police, and hopefully the local police department, all they have to do is park a cruiser in front of that kid's house, and that party's not going to happen. They don't have to physically go in and bust the party. They may not have enough to do that, but all they have to do is park a police car in front of the house, and ain't no party going to go on that night with the car parked out front. But that's what's going on today with kids. Is, these just unbelievably naive about the power of these drugs.
I think too, people think they're not afraid because these are prescribed drugs coming from a legitimate source, a doctor, or from the medical establishment. I think the other thing that people mix up is that I can't die because I'm not addicted, when in fact you can die with the first dose of an opiate that you take, just like you can die with the first dose of cocaine that you take. You're not addicted, you took it once, so you're not addicted, but you can still die. So those are some sort of myths or ideas that people have that aren't right.
What about overseas production?
Yeah, the overseas production, there's just, there's ways you can get it over the internet that you could never do 10 years ago.
And you have no idea what you did.
And you have no idea what
you have no idea what you're getting.
Let's open it up to our audience, and I know we have questions. Yes, sir.
My question is if each of you would comment on the legalization of marijuana, which is taking place at certain state levels. What do you think the impact of that will be?
Actually, as a judge, I'm not allowed to comment on things like that. It's unethical for me to talk about something that could eventually come onto my docket, so I cannot talk about legalization of drugs, but I will leave that up to, I'll pass the buck to the doctor.
I believe I am allowed to talk about it, and I can only speak from my own perspective as an addiction psychiatrist. I think it's a huge mistake. I think, again, it's going to open up the door to a lot of things that we don't want to see. And so I'm going to do what I can to fight against it. Do I think it's actually going to eventually make it to Ohio? I do, and I think that we have to be prepared for it. But as a person, an individual, I'm against it.
Can you also explain on that note the difference between the pot that's out there today and the pot that was out there 20 years ago?
Yes, there's been a huge increase in the purity. So if you think about the pot that your grandmother smoked, that might have been 10% or 12% THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the ingredient that makes you high. Nowadays, with the way that they can breed and grow the plants and make it more and more and more pure, you're getting 60, 70, 80% THC. The other thing is that we also have on the streets synthetic marijuana, which they call K2 or spice. And the synthetic marijuana is very interesting because it's had an antipsychotic element in it taken out. So you are actually more likely to become psychotic on K2 and spice than you are on regular weed. So it's just a lot of interesting chemistry going on there.
Just put a disturbing mental image of my head.
Yes.
Questions?
Thank you very much for this panel. There was a hearing this past week at Cleveland City Hall that some folks in the room were participants in, and one was Dr. Papp from Metro Hospital, who's here. One of the statistics that came out was that 60% of the people who overdose from heroin do so in the presence of someone else. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the legislation that's in front of our state legislators right now. It seems like such an impossible problem to solve that you guys are fighting, but these are concrete steps to do it, and I wonder if you could add to those too in terms of what can this room do to make sure that nobody else dies.
All right. I can't comment on pending legislation, but I want to kind of touch on what you started off with. I was going to try to bring that statistic in. The problem is people, when they overdose, they're usually with, almost all the time they're with people. They're shooting up with a friend, with a partner, and the friend or partner panics because now they have a potentially dead body in the room with them with a whole bunch of drugs, and they're afraid that they're going to get busted for the drugs. They're going to get busted in their mind. They're going to get hit with a murder rap. You know, you become irrational, and so instead of just dropping the dime and calling 911, they panic and they leave the house, and that person dies alone when they could have easily been saved. And so, but as far as the legislation, I will once again hand it off.
And I'm so glad that you asked that question. The thing to remember and take home with you today is House Bill 170. So House Bill 170 is the naloxone bill. So naloxone is a drug that when sprayed into somebody's nose can wake them up from an opiate overdose. The way that the current laws in Ohio are written is that only the person who is identified with the opiate addiction can get a hold of one of these vials of naloxone. If we are successful in getting House Bill 170 to pass, then mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, daughters, and sons of people with opiate addiction can get their hands on one of these kits. This is very similar to having an EpiPen if you have a penicillin or a peanut allergy. So instead of having an EpiPen, what you would have is a naloxone nasal spray that you can spray into somebody's nose and bring them up out of the coma that they are in. So it's extraordinarily important to get this passed. Joan Papp, who is in the audience from Metro Health, has single-handedly brought this project, which is called Project Dawn, to life in Cuyahoga County, and she actually was in Columbus testifying about it. And so I guess all I can say is every day that goes by that House Bill 170 doesn't pass, 5 more people overdose in our county. So I urge people to please contact your state legislator and say, please, can we pass House Bill 170 so that family members can get a hold of this very important medication.
And right now, what's kind of a scary thing that a lot of people don't realize is only advanced EMTs can carry the naloxone with them. So your I won't say average, but regular EMTs
EMT basics.
Yeah, EMT basics. You know, if a firefighter or police officers can't carry it. In Lorain, they started a pilot program. The legislature allowed Lorain police officers and first responders to carry it, and actually it happened about just a few weeks before the huge fentanyl issue in Lorain. And there were, I think, there were 6 deaths?
16, yeah, I think 16 overdoses and 3 deaths.
Yeah, and
something like that.
The deaths were, all of those people probably would have died if it had happened in Cuyahoga County, because Cuyahoga County doesn't have the naloxone. The first responders, the police officers in Lorain had that, and they were able to use it and save lives. And from what I understand, Doctor, if you come across somebody who's not having an overdose and you squirt it in, it won't do anything to them.
That's correct. Nothing bad will happen. And if they happen to be ODing from cocaine or something else, nothing bad will happen. It's just that if it happens to be an opiate overdose, you will wake them up. The other thing that's interesting about House Bill 170 is it will also allow first responders, police officers, and EMT basics to also administer it, which is huge. So all those things are happening or about to happen in our state.
And speaking of Lorain, when the officers were first starting to carry the naloxone, it was 12 days later they saved their first life. I talked to the woman they saved. It was the first time she'd ever used heroin.
Oh my God. See?
Question?
I want to go back to the opiates as an entry point to this epidemic. My personal experience was in the last year I had 2 medical procedures, one due to an accident, one scheduled. And in both cases, the doctors that treated me prescribed Vicodin after to take home or to go get a prescription. Well, I'm a person who's probably old school in a lot of different ways, and one of them is I don't like taking drugs, so I didn't go fill the prescriptions, partly because I knew I wouldn't use the whole prescription, and I didn't want to have the problem that the judge has of disposing of it. Nor did I want to have the problem of somebody taking it. What about a public education campaign to educate patients and doctors that, you know, maybe there are other alternatives to opioids to treat people's pain, and they should be more cautious about either prescribing or even asking for such? And I'd like Monica to comment on that, since she's in the media as well as the other people on the panel.
Well, first of all, when you walk in, the heroin and opioid epidemic in Northeast Ohio, the Community Action Plan, Mike Tobin from the U.S. Attorney's Office is here, who brought this for everyone. That is definitely on the list, and it has started. One of the things that people are getting more savvy, especially in the medical community, is doctors are getting hip to the problem, and they are thinking about it. The other issue, though, is for many of these people, once they're, you know, they get these pills, they get addicted, nothing else works for them. So that's an issue as well. And then when you cut the prescription, that if they're already addicted, then you're forcing someone to go out and find a worse alternative. Dr. Chris, you can probably.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I think education is a huge part of the answer to this, and there have already been things happening at both the statewide level and at local levels to start to educate folks, but we still need to do more. There's so much more we can do.
And at WKYC, what we're doing is, in addition to that hour documentary we did that aired last April, we also put together a 20-minute documentary that was aimed at 5th and 6th graders in school. And when we made it available, we had no idea how many schools would ask for it. It's up to 300.
Well, we distributed it to 350 schools.
We distributed the video to 350 schools and asked them to, and the reason we targeted this video to 5th and 6th graders is because by the time they're in middle school, 7th or 8th grade, they already know where to get it. They already know what it is. So you have to hit them younger to get this message across that how deadly and dangerous this drug can be. But in addition to that, we just got an email the other day from a school nurse in New Jersey asking for our video. So the public awareness we're definitely doing. And that was one of the reasons heroin used to be that shameful subject nobody talked about. And it's like ripping a scab off or a Band-Aid off a wound. It has to be talked about. That's the only way we're going to get it fixed.
One of the things I'm doing, we started in the fall, is we're going to several of the suburbs. We're doing what's called Heroin in the Suburbs forums. It's myself, Dr. Papp has been out, Vince from the Board of Health. I believe Dr. Reyes, you're on one of our things coming up.
Yes.
And what we're going, because the suburban communities are generally in denial that anything's going on. I had a mother tell me that one of her friends, like, oh yeah, my daughter doesn't do any of that stuff. And the woman knew from her daughter that woman's daughter is one of the biggest druggies in the Catholic high school that she went to. And parents are in denial that there's a problem. They're in denial that it's in my community. Well, I can guarantee you it's in Hunting Valley, it's in Pepper Pike, it's in Bay Village, it's in Westlake, it's in Strongsville, it's in Solon, it's everywhere. And so we're going to the suburbs and we're having panels of experts to try to educate individuals about what's out there. And it's kind of eye-opening when I tell my stories and I tell about the search warrants I've signed in Strongsville and in Solon for houses that are well within 1,000 feet of a school, middle school or elementary school or high school, that a drug dealer with large amounts of heroin, large amounts of ecstasy is within eyesight of a middle school. And it finally hits home to some of these folks in the suburbs that you're not immune, that it's here and it's not going away. And so we're trying to go about that and educate the community through these forums. And our next one is in Bay Village, I believe, at the end of February.
I think that in addition to individuals and individual communities being in denial, school districts are very similar. They're also in denial. It doesn't happen in our district. It doesn't happen in our schools. I have been blessed to be part of the Cuyahoga County Opiate Task Force, which is chaired by Vince Caraffy at the Board of Health. And we meet every other month. And we are looking for individuals that work with school districts to join us. So we have people from every walk of life in that room and every sector, but the one sector where we don't have enough people is school districts. So it's the more the merrier. If you want to come to our meetings, they are open meetings. We do meet every other month, and we can get that information to you.
Yeah, we actually had a woman from an inner ring suburb tell us essentially that the word epidemic is a joke, that there's no epidemic and that it's not happening, and why don't I go we should go talk to a certain west side suburb where she knows there's a problem. And so she named that, so I'm not going to say, we're not going to talk about where this is, but I went and I looked at the maps and looked at the death rates and the usage rates in her suburb and that suburb. They were identical. And so that's, that's what we're dealing with.
And something else to add to that, in addition to heroin making drug addicts, the drug also makes people expert liars.
Oh God, yeah.
And they are so good at hiding and convincing because they have to. So, question?
I have a concern about, and am I pronouncing this right, naloxone? Okay, so I have a concern about it, and I'd really like to hear what the response is from experts. My concern is that by making it more prevalent in our community, we would certainly be saving lives, but could there be an unintended consequence of people no longer having a fear of overdose? And I wonder if that's been a part of the discussion.
Yes, that has been a part of the discussion, and I have actually heard some folks saying that we can party because we have this kit right here. So that is absolutely a part of it. But I have to think that for every one time that happens, there may be 10 times where a son or a son or a mother saves their family member from dying. The other thing that's interesting in terms of data, they've done nationwide studies on naloxone, that of the people that you wake up, a third of them will continue to use, but 60 to 70% of them will actually get help. So it is by no means a perfect program, but it is a life-saving program. So I appreciate the comment.
Questions?
We know this isn't a Northeast Ohio problem, and we're not going to get the solution only here. We look at benchmarks for lots of different things. We look to Minneapolis because they do great with wellness and bicycling. We look to Silicon Valley for technology. Is there a region or a city in the United States that is held up as somebody that's really doing a good job, and where does Cleveland fit within the whole spectrum?
I know St. Louis has been held out to a certain extent. They're doing, and we kind of took the format for our forums, our community forums, from some of the stuff they're doing in St. Louis, where they were going out into the suburban communities and talking about what's going on. And they have a website. I don't know what the website is, but they have a very good website. So just top of mind, that's what comes to my head. But I know that the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Cleveland Clinic with the Heroin Summit, that was groundbreaking what they did. We put together the action plan, and we're trying to be proactive about battling this here in Northeast Ohio. So I think that we're taking a certain amount of national lead here with regard to the problem. I know that the Justice Department is interested in moving forward and trying to get other cities to do very similar things to what we're doing here in Cuyahoga County.
I think Quincy, Massachusetts has also been in the news because they put naloxone kits in the hands of every one of the police officers, and that made national news. In terms of where do I think Cleveland fits in, I have to think that our county and our city is up near the top in doing something about this problem. So,
I think one of the biggest issues as well is changing the mindset. When Judge Astrab and I in the City Club were promoting this forum, we had people commenting. Go ahead.
Don't get me started on the people that comment on stories after Cleveland.com. But if you look at the commenters after the stories, if you look at Facebook, when one of the TV stations posts a story about overdose, you're going to see, oh, they're ghetto trash, let them die. Just one less addict to worry about. It's our tax dollars, and I get infuriated. And they personally attack you on Twitter. I know that for a fact, because you don't know what you're talking about. You've never had anyone die in your family, and it's just those people I think are the mark. We have to marginalize those. But the trouble is, when you read a story and when you look in Facebook and you see those comments, everyone sees the comments, and some people, they take them for the joke that they are, but not joke. I mean, the people, they're just not legitimate concerns, and just to let an addict die, that's obviously not a solution. And
that's pretty old thinking.
Yeah.
I think that's old moral model thinking instead of disease model thinking. So
nobody wakes up every day wanting to be a heroin addict. Questions?
You have to have,
I'm sorry, wait.
You have to have a mic.
You talked about the number of pills that are out there per person. Obviously, doctors who prescribe ridiculous amounts should be brought under control. In this day and age of electronic medical records, in order to get some control over the people who are providing the pills, is there, to your knowledge, any idea of providing a central electronic registry of all prescription drugs so that the people who are doing this can be identified and monitored?
That already exists. It's called OARS, O-A-R-R-S, the Ohio Automated Prescription Reporting System. The problem is it's not mandatory for either physicians or pharmacists to be on it, number one. Number two, right now it doesn't talk to states across lines, so people can go from Kentucky to Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania. That's number two. And number three, the State Medical Board of Ohio has just gotten a new executive director who happened to be the governor's go-to person on the opiate epidemic. So that's good news. So Aaron Haslam is working day and night on this issue. I know him personally, and things are going to change here very soon. So thank you for bringing that up. But yes, it is kind of amazing that though we have the technology, it is not mandatory for a physician to check that before they give a, you do it, it's voluntary. If you want to check, go for it. If you don't want to check, you don't have to. So.
I can speak from experience in looking at some of the indictments that I see that's called deception to obtain a dangerous drug. It's a felony. And you'll see some of these indictments, February 1st, the next indictment, February 3rd. I'm just going, we had one who was literally going down the hall in a medical building to different doctors. And it has to be mandated. I was shocked when I heard it wasn't mandatory to do this. And you have people that they're feeding their addiction through the ignorance of people who are not who are tasked with protecting them, who are not indirectly protecting them by being too free and loose with giving out these medications.
Vince?
Touched on it briefly as far as the importance of recovery and treatment. Are there any legislative bills in place to actually open up or get more resources towards that, to bring more to Ohio as far as space for treatment, more resources for treatment, or opening up different situations where there's going to be opportunities for open beds for people that are family members in need?
I don't know the bills by number and all that, but there are certainly movements both at the state level and at the local level to increase those dollars. So with the levy passing, that was great news for the community, but it's about getting the right folks at the table to have the discussions that will increase the number of treatment slots and treatment beds.
So in closing, today at the City Club, we've been listening to a Friday Forum panel discussion about the heroin epidemic. I want to thank you, Dr. Delos Reyes, Judge Astrab, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, huge thanks to the City Club for taking an issue that nobody wants to talk about and bringing it to the forefront. Every single one of you can make a difference. All you need to do is talk. Thank you.
Thank you.